Chapter 12. Assignment to Israel. We were just starting to live normally again. Or so it seemed, when in September 1976, Ronnie was asked if he would accept an assignment to Israel for the F-15 Fighter Aircraft Division. He was to be assigned to the Defense Attaché Office of the American Embassy in Tel Aviv. He would work with the Israeli Air Force on the Foreign Military Sales Program and would assist them in developing their support program for the first 25 F-15 fighter aircraft, which were to arrive several months later. Both of us were very excited about the prospect of going to Israel, where we would finally get to see, firsthand, the places where Christ had lived, taught the gospel, and had given his life for mankind. Ronnie told me that he had hoped for such an assignment, but had not asked for it. I never even dreamed that we would ever receive an assignment to Israel. Once again, there was much to be done before we could leave. There were releases from church callings, packing to be done, an automobile to be sold, and our house needed to be rented out. Of course, Ronnie had a schedule for departure that could not be delayed, so he departed October 8th, 1976, and I remained behind to complete the packing and shipping of certain items and storage of our furniture, etc. Seems like I have done this before. I was able to sell the automobile, rent the house, and complete all actions necessary to meet a departure date of October 27th, 1976. The house was vacated a couple of days before, so I had to spend a night or two with our son Ron Jr. and his family. They drove me to the airport on the morning of the 27th and waited with me until my flight departed. When I arrived in Atlanta, I found that my connecting flight had been delayed, so there I sat for the next 2 hours. We finally took off for New York, but we arrived in New York too late for my connecting flight to Tel Aviv. As luck would have it, I was soon, or a Boeing 747 with a refueling stop in Rome. There were empty seats, so I was able to stretch out and sleep most of the night. It was really a wonderful flight. I still marvel at the advancement made in technology since World War II. At age 17, I walked for 40 days alone, over 500 miles across the frozen tundra of Russia. In 1976, I am sitting comfortably in a huge Boeing 747 traveling over 500 miles an hour, crossing the Atlantic Ocean and hopping from one country to the next with little effort on my part. VIP treatment in Tel Aviv. When our plane landed at the airport in Tel Aviv, all the passengers began to stand up and retrieve their baggage and ready themselves for the mad dash to the door. As they stood waiting for the door to open, the captain announced that everyone was to sit back down and remain seated. We all wondered if it had something to do with terrorism, since we had been alerted to terrorist activity while back in the States. Then I was surprised when an official called my name and asked me to come forward and deplane first. I wondered if I might have been under suspicion as a Russian agent of some kind, since I was born in the USSR and could have been a Russian spy or some such thing. I was quickly relieved to know that Ronnie was waiting at the foot of the stairs and had pre-arranged for TWA to give me the VIP treatment. A good church brother, Gil Paul, was the supervisor for TWA, so he made all the arrangements. In case you might be wondering, VIP means very important person. Won't wonders ever cease? We got into TWA's VIP vehicle, a nice automobile, and rode to the entry gate. Processing through customs was very simple once we located our baggage. They didn't even bother to look. Ronnie had purchased a 1974 Volkswagen Dasher with very low mileage, so we had our own transportation. We drove immediately to the Pole Hotel in Tel Aviv. Ronnie had negotiated for rental of an apartment in Herzliya Heights. but it wasn't quite ready for us to move in. So we remained at the Pal Hotel for a few more days. Our apartment was on the 7th floor of a huge condominium building and was really beautiful. Church activity in Israel. I arrived on Friday, 28th of October, 1976, and we had planned to attend church in Jerusalem next day, since Saturday was our Sabbath day in Israel. But I became ill during the night, and Ronnie had to go. Without me. Brother Gil Paul and Sister Daphne Brofman went with him while I remained at the hotel to rest and try to get well. There were only 4 adult Mormons and 2 children in the church living in Tel Aviv when we arrived there. Besides Gil Paul and Daphne Brofman, there was Terrell, Terry, and Linda Bringhurst and their 2 children, Michael and Amy. Daphne was a single girl, and Gil Paul's wife, Nurit, was Jewish, and not the least bit interested in the church. About 100 members of the BYU study group attended the Jerusalem branch, so it was a nice-sized branch and very active. We attended there about twice, and then it was decided to organize a group in Tel Aviv with Ronnie as group leader and Terry Bringhurst as first assistant, and Gil Paul as second assistant or as first and second counselors. This was done on the 6th of November, 1976. Gil Paul also acted as the branch group clerk, and I was set apart as Relief Society coordinator. Linda Bringhurst was my only assistant. For the next 12 months, we attended every other meeting in Jerusalem. Then on the 6th of November, 1977, we organized as a regular branch with Ronnie as its president, and we were no longer dependent on the Jerusalem branch. By that time, we had additional members and always had visiting tourists in attendance. We later had as many as 250 visiting tourists at one time. Of course, we were always happy to swell the ranks and have a big meeting. Before I get too far ahead, I want to tell you just how wonderful it was to be in the land where Jesus lived and ministered. I remember my very first meeting in Jerusalem. It was a testimony meeting and was held on the first Saturday of the month, or 6th November 1976, the same day that they formed our Tel Aviv group. It was such a wonderful meeting. Many young BYU students bore their testimony, and we bore ours. It was such a good feeling to be in the city of peace, Jerusalem, and be attending a branch of the Lord's own true church. What a blessing this was to us. The Lord's true church had not been in Jerusalem or anywhere else in Israel for almost 2,000 years, and now here we were in attendance in a branch of His church, just as true as the early church that we read about in the New Testament of the Bible. What more could we ask for? It took a while to get settled in and learn how to get around by bus in Tel Aviv. I had used the city bus when we used to live in Macon, Georgia, but that had been quite some time ago, and I needed to get used to it again. I was used to having my own automobile back in Kathleen, Georgia. We were immediately accepted by the Israeli people and rapidly made many friends. Ronnie's job brought him in direct daily contact with Israeli Air Force personnel, and it seems that almost all their officers had been trained at Hill Air Force Base, Utah. They all seemed to love living among the Mormons, and when they discovered that we were also Mormons, that made us just that much more acceptable. Since Ronnie was assigned to the U.S. Embassy, one of my first duties was to meet Mrs. Toon, the wife of Ambassador Malcolm Toon. She was a delightful lady, but the Toons were only there for a short time, and they moved on to Moscow. But not before we had been invited to their residence for a party at 6 p.m. on November 1st, 1976. Ambassador Toon seemed to be just the type of man that we needed in Moscow at that time. He had that look of dignity that one would expect of an ambassador, yet he was a very friendly individual. Their replacement was Ambassador Sam Lewis and his wife Sally. They were such wonderful people, and Sally was a pure delight. When Ronnie's parents visited us in September 1977, we met Sally as we were entering the embassy, and she made them feel so welcome. She said, "Why didn't you tell me that they were coming so that we could do something special for them?" She really meant what she said too. That was just the way Sally was. Her husband Sam reflected much the same personality, but he was the ambassador and had to live up to an ambassador's image, so he was a bit more subdued, but yet very friendly and easy in conversation. We were always invited to the ambassadorial parties, and that was a good place to meet all the important people of the embassy, and sometimes Israeli dignitaries were invited. On one such occasion, we had just gone through the reception line and had shaken hands with the ambassador and his wife Sally, when all of a sudden, we noticed all the news cameramen make a mad dash for their cameras which they had stashed in a neat pile. We turned around to see what or who was so all-important, and there behind us in the line was none other than Prime Minister Menachem Begin and his wife. The cameraman didn't want to miss a shot of the Prime Minister shaking hands with the American ambassador Sam Lewis. We didn't want to be caught standing in awe, so we melted slowly into the crowd to mix and mingle with familiar faces and friends. Our little branch of the church had begun to grow, and we had about 38 regular members, but there were always many visitors from the States, and it required a lot of work to keep the branch functioning as the Lord would want it to. This story will be continued for the benefit of our posterity. Note, we spent a total of 4 years in Israel and left there in September 1980 for a 1-year assignment at Camp New Amsterdam, Netherlands. We returned to Robins Air Force Base, Georgia, in September 1981. Ronnie retired from government service in October 1982, and now, in 1997, we live at 12,647 South, 2525 West Riverton, Utah, 84065. After 54 years, we found that the child Anatoly had died in 1946 in Russia. End.